Hello all, and thank you for listening to our talk. I'm Alex Kinnaman, and my colleague James Tuttle and I are here to talk through our experience pursuing the CoreTrustSeal Certification at Virginia Tech University Libraries in collaboration with the Academic Preservation Trust and other DigiPres communities and the impact that this had on VT libraries. To provide a little context for this project, Virginia Tech University Libraries has 3 institutional repositories and 1 digital libraries platform, which is currently under development. Since I've been at the libraries, we have attempted some haphazard policy development. We've created a TDR self-audit infrastructure and performed a full self-audit on VTech data, our data repository, which has since migrated to a different platform, rendering this moot. All in all, these efforts have had minimal impact on our development. To give you a sense of our previous storage and workflow infrastructure, circa 2018, you can see how trying to wrangle it together into one cohesive workflow would be tears-inducing and difficult to audit. The reason our previous storage system looked like this is because over time, there has been an organic growth of approaches to digital preservation, access, documentation development, and asset management between each repository, service, and department. We also employ multiple platforms, including DSpace, Fedora Hydra, AWS, Omeka, and now Figshare. We had significant local storage synced to a secondary server, but up until recently, very little cloud storage. Basically, all of our workflows for access and preservation activities were not in a unified workflow, and there was very little documented policy and procedure for any of it. Now we have the Virginia Tech Digital Libraries Platform, or DLP. This is a cloud-native digital library solution supporting preservation and access that is built on AWS and employs customized microservices. This doesn't consolidate all of our current access points, but the DLP is now our central pipeline for preservation. So specific digital library content is fed into both an access platform and a preservation platform, and then feeds all of the other institutional repository content into that same preservation platform. The development of this platform and its subsequent services indicated an obvious need for formal policy. As our official preservation system, we needed the core digital preservation, succession, access, and collection development policies. The microservices on which the DLP is built also required both a public-facing policy to increase transparency and an inward-facing procedure to guide a single workflow for the team to follow. This meant a minimum of roughly 10 new policies. For us, this began organically. The systems team requested an identifier minting policy to go along with the service, which I had never written before, and I had to investigate what kind of content to put in that policy and how to structure it. So this is kind of what started our policy building process. Switching gears, enter the CoreTrustSeal Certification. We in the libraries had been hoping to establish a self-audit, if not a formal certification, and the development of the DLP seemed like the perfect opportunity to make sure development was based on a standard and that we weren't missing anything up front. Some quick background on the CoreTrustSeal. It's a basic certification that is more straightforward than NDSA or TDR and is well suited for self-audits. Its authority is a board and a set of reviewers and comprises of 17 total requirements. And here we add our final component, the Academic Preservation Trust. I currently serve on the certification working group for AP Trust, and we had pursued certification from 2018 to 2020. We were denied twice, based on the rationale that the AP Trust is just a service and not an open repository. CoreTrust is designed specifically for open repositories, and they made it clear that AP Trust alone would not meet their criteria. The reviewers recommended that an AP Trust member submit an application for co-certification, and because Virginia Tech was already trying to measure the development of our DLP, we took on this project in September 2020. So how this ended up working is that Virginia Tech became the applying organization as opposed to AP Trust, and we took the lead on authorship. We developed responses to each of the criteria based on the DLP, and highlighted support from AP Trust where relevant by including AP Trust documentation. AP Trust then reviewed the criteria and selected policies and provided feedback to Virginia Tech in a feedback loop that just continued until the items were complete. During this process, we had 2 separate workflows moving simultaneously. We also had to establish or wrangle a body within the library to review and approve these policies. and we voluntold our IT advisory group for this work. The IT advisory group is a group made up of both IT and IT stakeholders that includes department heads. So the first workflow is the policy development workflow that began with 2 or 3 people drafting before it moved to the IT advisory group. Once feedback was requested and responded to for IT advisory, select policies like the digital preservation policy moved to AP Trust review. Once one or both reviewing bodies were complete with no outstanding comments or concerns, we would then publish the policy on Confluence. We were a little ahead on policy development, so at the same time, we began developing the requirements for CoreTrust. In this case, it would also be about 2 or 3 of us drafting, and then the first draft would go to AP Trust for review first. And once it was more polished, the requirement would then go to library stakeholders that we had identified. The final phase was to have AP Trust do another review for cohesiveness and formatting and clarity, and then the requirements were finalized. This co-application process had significant impacts on the libraries. We managed to collaboratively design a process for policy and procedure development. We had multiple institutions reviewing our preservation-related policies. Our policy could drive software development. We developed internal feedback loops that were successful. We were provided a scaffolding for policy development, and we used all of this to advocate for digital preservation needs. So first, this prompted a strong move towards changing the culture in the libraries. To quote our wonderful digital imaging coordinator, changing the culture of an organization is like steering a large ship. You can turn the rudder now, but it takes time for the ship to change course. This process has allowed us to really make that turn by establishing a shared model of values, processes, tools, and policies in order to have internal trust and a collective understanding about the needs and priorities of the organization as a whole. One of the most unique aspects of this project is that we had the expertise from multiple institutions through the AP Trust and meta-archive communities in the development of our policies. We pretty much had every gap identified and mediated before even publishing the policies the first time. These individuals not only reviewed the policies themselves, but also provided feedback on formatting and presentation on the Confluence site. They discussed alternative workflows, shared their own diagrams and policies for reference, and basically, we had an entire group of experts with an eye on all of this content. Internally, this drive moved much more quickly than we could develop software, which led us to have policy-driven software development rather than the usual software-driven policy. I think we can all agree that that is magical. To get this moving, we initiated immediate and direct communication with IT and our systems team to produce microservices based on the idealized policy. An example of this is our preservation event audit policy, which was designed with a modified premise schema, discussed with IT, modified for a little bit more compromise, and then implemented by the systems team. Another example is our test restoration policy. The procedure had been implemented, but had not been written. We formalized the process and designed a policy with more specific parameters, such as how often to test restore content, how many items to restore, where we wanted to restore from, and so on. And then the systems team adapted their procedure. Another major impact on the libraries is the internal collaboration. We use this fast policy building process as a tool for breaking down silos between departments, teams, and projects. We are slowly but surely creating interdepartmental consensus on a digital preservation approach through our policies and documentation. This is new for us, as past conversations about file and folder naming and content organization and other similar topics have been a little bit more sensitive. This was accomplished with a transparent feedback loop between digital preservation, IT advisory group, the systems team, and individual stakeholders to compromise and then publish policies. One example of this was the support we had in developing a succession policy from upper administration. We were able to work directly with our financial director to have an accurate and agreed upon contingency plan for cessation of funding. Whoa. Another example was working with our institutional repositories to adapt their deposit agreement into one for the DLP. Further, the CoreTrustSeal criteria includes very specific guidance on what they expect and the policies necessary to support those expectations. Combined with feedback from our fellow DigiPres colleagues, we had a strong scaffolding for ongoing policy development. We focused initially on the policies required by the CoreTrust criteria, such as the digital preservation policy, succession policy, etc., and then developed policies to support and supplement these policies that met our unique needs in the libraries, like our identifier minting policy and our digital preservation strategies. A huge and hopefully long-term impact this process has had for the libraries is increased advocacy and education with and for our colleagues. CoreTrust was a motivation to increase timelines for response requests, to intentionally look for gaps in our workflows, and to get some significant support from upper administration. We thank the digital preservation community for providing reinforcement and validation for digital preservation activities that we wanted. We also thank AP Trust for providing detailed feedback and helping us communicate with our systems team and generally just putting up with me. And we appreciate our library for not only realizing and acknowledging, but acting upon the need for formalized processes and software development priorities. So we officially submitted our CoreTrustSeal co-application in August and are awaiting response. But that doesn't mean we have completed our work. We continue to identify areas that do need policies and documentation still, and soon we'll be implementing our maintenance schedule on each policy, particularly as the DLP evolves. Just a couple of links to share. Hopefully my in-person self will be putting these in the chat about now. Just gonna nudge myself there. You can learn more about our policies and procedures on Confluence. You can learn about the DLP infrastructure on the About page. And then you can see a draft project that has stemmed from AP Trust to create an actual guide for policy development. So thank you so much for listening. Please contact us via email or Twitter with any questions, comments, or feedback.